So, Pinocchio is the story that is trying to answer the question, what does it mean to be real? And last week we got up until the fact that he was lying to the blue fairy and his nose grew. So let's recap everything from the beginning here. So Pinocchio is what? What is he? A doll? A puppet? What other word did we use? Started with an M. Started with an M.
Marionette.
Good, a marionette. And so we opened the story with this guy, and this guy is who? Good. What's his name? Good. His name is Jiminy Cricket. He plays the role of the conscience, and his initials are JC. So he's a godlike figure like Christ, but he's very, very bad at his job. He opens it up, and he's the one who tells us the story. So we see things here. And the story opens up in Geppetto's home. And the conscience comes in, and he looks like this because he's weak and a hobo. And he gets the job of becoming the conscience, but he's not the conscience now. So this was Pinocchio. He didn't have a mouth. And the conscience knocks him on the head and shows that he's an empty-headed wooden doll. But Geppetto comes along and gives him a mouth. Why? Because Geppetto is what? He's an archetype. He is a doll maker. He's good. He's the good father figure. Very good, Grant. And so he gives the son the mouth. This is very important because that's what good fathers do. Geppetto is the essence of the good father. He has a flaw that we'll try and talk about tonight if there's time, as older but good people do. But we saw that there are tyrannical beings, tyrannical fathers in Pinocchio. This is the conscience enjoying Geppetto as the good father dancing around with the puppet on the strings. But the tyrannical father, notice this, and I didn't mention this last week, so let me bring it back. When he looks back and he sees it and he says, well, you can't please everyone, that's kind of the line. You get the archetype, the bad father, the tyrannical father here from this, not only from the facial expressions, but from the fact that he's wearing a crown and looking down on the good father dancing with the puppet. Good art does this. Everything that you need to understand is right there in the photo. He's angry, he's upset, you can see that on his face, and he's ruling over and looking down upon the situation and looking with disapproval. So that's a big problem. And then the clocks go off. We saw that, and they get ready for bed, and Geppetto makes his wish. And then what happened here? With the clocks. They all started going off, and the conscience yelled and said, shut up, and they did. And so what happens? The clocks literally stopped, and what does that symbolize? Good, he stops time, and we enter the dream state. And from heaven, all right, let me back up to this. From heaven here comes the blue fairy. She's the archetype of the good mother, or mother nature, who comes and gives life to the puppet, voice, cuts his strings, and they make a deal and says, if you're a good boy and you have the option to figure out how to become real if you want. And he says, well, how do I do that? He says, let your conscience be your guide. And this is when the cricket, Jiminy, steps up and says, I'll be the conscience. And so she dubs him the conscience. But of course, he's really bad at it, and he tries to explain what it is to be good and what evil is. And of course, Pinocchio doesn't understand because he's an empty-headed doll. So the conscience is frustrated, the puppet's confused, but the father's really happy. The next day dawns, and the father pushes the son out into the world, because that's what the good father does. You can't sit at home and live in peace and security. If you're going to become real, whatever that means, you're going to have to go out into the world and do things. So the good father sends him out to go where? To school. Unfortunately, he's swindled by the fox, and we talked about that. On his way to school, the fox stops him and swindles him and convinces him not to go to school, but to go off and become what? What? Good, Grant, an actor. He convinces him, it's going to take too long for you to go to school, wink, wink. Enjoy the quick and easy life and become an actor. And they sing this song, An Actor's Life for Me, and it's all about quick and easy success. There's never anything going wrong in the life of an actor. And the conscience is bad at his job, so he shows up late on the first day, and he's kind of too late. Pinocchio, being empty-headed, is led astray and swindled by the fox to go off and be in the show. This is a puppeteer named Stromboli that knows the fox, so the fox leads Pinocchio down this path to become an actor. He's really bad at the job, but Stromboli is upset until he realizes the crowd actually likes it. They're comedical. And so you see that another aspect of a tyrannical father that looks down on certain situations is, if you screw this up for me and you make me look bad, I will be angry and I will hate you. That's what's going on here, until he realizes he doesn't actually look bad. Then he's okay with whatever the person does. The conscience is not okay with it, and so Pinocchio goes on singing the songs. He gets tangled up by a bunch of Russians. We talked about that. Notice the color red, because we'll come back to this red notion here in these puppets. Okay, when we get to the stagecoach guy, and you can see some red when you tangle up here and in Stromboli, but the stagecoach driver is a whole nother level. So the conscience kind of recedes. He goes away. Pinocchio's entrapped. And this tyrannical father figure is, instead of caring about all his blessings down here that he got from Pinocchio's show, he focuses on the one thing that wasn't money. He gets upset. He locks Pinocchio in the cage until the conscience comes back. Can't get Pinocchio out, because that's what happens. When you go and you chase after quick and easy success, your conscience recedes for a little while. And then when you get stuck in a situation that you can't get yourself out of, your conscience tends to come back, because you're paying attention again. You're trying to figure out how to get yourself out of this. And so it's symbolized by the cricket showing up again, but it's not enough to actually get them out. So who shows up? The angel. The blue fairy, the good, definitely an angel figure, Jared. That's a good way to say this. She's an angelic figure from the heavens. She shows up and questions Pinocchio, and of course, what does he do? He lies, and so his nose grows, and it starts growing and growing until it branches out, and because that's what lying is. Lying inevitably branches out, and you're forced to actually keep track of all your lies until they weigh you down. But Mother Nature, the good blue fairy, takes pity on him, restores his nose, and lets him go. Okay, so that's all that we talked about last week. So Pinocchio's on this path to try and become a real boy. His conscience is really, really bad at being a conscience, and they don't know how to work together, communicate, and be integrated with one another until something bad happens. And then they come back together and they try and figure it out, but they can't. And we come to this place called the Lobster Inn, and you'll notice the red here because we're introduced to a new character, the stagecoach driver. We find out that's his occupation, and he kind of goes by that title. And you see all the red here. Now keep track of that. Now, notice his face. His face is changing bit by bit here as the fox tells the story of how he swindled Pinocchio and got him in. And the fox is bragging about how bad and evil he is and stuff. And the stagecoach driver, let me back up to this. If you look here, you can kind of see his face in the shadows, and then it zooms in on his face, and because he knows that the fox is an idiot. Oh, he can swindle, but if you really want bad, here's bad. The stagecoach is the tyrannical father in truth. We've seen the foreshadowing of the statue looking down at the dancing. We've seen Stromboli's controlling power. We've seen the fox a little bit manipulative and stuff, but here's the story's personification of evil and tyranny. The stagecoach driver. His face has gone from white to red, so now his face is as red as his coat. And it scares the fox because the fox thinks that he was the big bad. that he's a big evil dude. He's bragging about it. But he's as much an empty-headed nothing as Pinocchio is, until he realizes that this guy's the real deal. Joker, when he smiles, okay, I think that's a good comment, Casey, because, you know, this movie's coming out in 1940. Batman was first released in 1940, I believe. Superman was released in 1939, Action Comics #1. Look it up. And Batman was released a year later. And so it should be 1940. So Batman is as old as Pinocchio is as a Disney movie. Now, I'll mention the book here if I have time. But so you mentioned this looks like the Joker. And so what if the authors of Batman, in developing the Joker, they go back to iconic figures and images like this for what? What does the Joker represent? Chaos. Very good, Jared. The 2008 masterpiece by Christopher Nolan, The Dark Knight, perfectly encapsulates this. And if the Joker is chaos, what is Batman? He's good, but he's a very specific type of good. He's an anti-hero. He's not just justice. What's the opposite of chaos? No? Order. Good. Order is the opposite of chaos. What does God do in Genesis 1? He sees primordial what? Chaos. And he turns it into what? Order. The eternal fight is between order and chaos. And every story that sticks with us in our culture is fundamentally about order and chaos on some level. The tyrannical father that is the stagecoach, chaos is a perfectly justifiable way to also think about it and conceive. Sin is a tyrant in Scripture. So you can learn something about the tyrannical father archetype, and then you can go read about the tyranny of Scripture, tyranny of sin rather, in Scripture, and realize that the same things it takes to defeat the stagecoach is the same thing it's going to take to defeat sin in your life. Or another way of saying that is you're going to have to go from being an empty-headed puppet to actually being a real boy or a real girl. You're going to have to learn order to go against chaos. You're going to have to learn good father traits in order to go against chaos. So that was a very good observation, I think, Casey. And so the chaos of the tyrannical father here freaks the fox out because he thinks he's the big bad, and then he realizes this is quite literally the big bad. He's much bigger than the other ones. And you see kind of the whole threatening scene between him, and he tells the fox and the cat, go round up the puppet, the boys, go out and kidnap a bunch of boys and bring them to me because I'm going to take them to Pleasure Island. And the fox freaks out because he's like, Pleasure Island, why do you want to go there? That place is, a bad place. And he says, just go out there and do it. So he acts his tyranny over these other people who think that they're bad. It's like the boss fights in video games, right? You think you're going up against the big bad, and then you realize they're just kind of the nothing characters to the real big bad. Now we're at the real big bad. Stromboli, not the real big bad. A bad guy. The fox, a bad guy, likes to boast and think that he's a lot bigger and badder than he is. But now we're at the real big bad. He's going to kidnap a bunch of kids and turn them into something. And so the fox goes out and he finds Pinocchio on his way home from being freed from Stromboli. So it's interesting that he's trying to go home. He's trying to go back to what he knows he's supposed to do. And instead, the fox plays his game again. Now notice here, the fox has nothing on his face. But when Pinocchio tells him, he's going home, he's going back to school, he's not going to be an actor anymore, blah, 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 those details, the fox says, what are you talking about? You don't look so well. And he pulls out his glasses. And I think this is kind of an interesting touch to the story. He puts the glasses on because he's going to try and look more respectable, like he knows what he's talking about. So he changes his appearance. That's kind of the idea going on here. And he tells Pinocchio that he looks sick. And you can see here he's checking his pulse of a wooden puppet, which I think is just a funny touch, right? But if you're an empty-headed person, or you're an empty-headed puppet, yeah, you wouldn't know what a pulse is, maybe. And so when he tries to check your pulse, you don't really think, oh, I don't have a pulse. He holds up a handkerchief. I forget what he says here, but the whole point is that he doesn't look so good, and he checks his heartbeat, and he writes a bunch of faulty notes and stuff. So he's swindling them all over again. But he looks respectable because he's got glasses, because he changes his appearance. And this is what liars and swindlers do. They put on a facade. They make themselves look presentable, and they talk really, really fast and really, really presentable and overload you with information and all these things that, maybe you are sick, maybe you need some help here. And overloading you with information, they sound a lot more convincing than what they really are. And he convinces him, and he even looks sick right here. And note this face, because when he gets to Pleasure Island, he smokes a cigar, he looks a lot like this. So he's even taking on the properties of being convinced that there's something wrong with you, and what you need to do is go on a vacation. And I've got good news, because there's this place called Pleasure Island. And if you go there, you'll stop being sick. And he swindles him by talking really fast, convincing him that there's something wrong with him. And then him and the cat, they lift him up and they literally carry him away. This is different from the scene before when they were singing the song, because Pinocchio was walking on his own 2 feet. So here, there's an added element to say he's being carried off against his will in a way, because he's not stopping and thinking about what the fox is telling him. He's still an empty-headed puppet, and that makes him easy fruit. Okay, so let's break this down real quick, and let me make a point here about what goes on today. So the fox is talking really fast and convincing him that there's a problem with him, and that there's the solution is just, you need to go on a vacation, you need to take some time off, rest and relax, and do nothing but go and have fun. That's the idea of this scene. That's the idea of Pleasure Island presented to him. And I think that's the idea that a lot of political people are offering to other people these days. Vote me into power. Why? Because there's something wrong and I need to fix it. Well, what's wrong? Well, you're wrong. And you need the government to come and provide you all these things. You need the government to give you universal health care. Well, since when? Humanity's gotten by pretty much okay for the last 10,000 years without universal health care. Why do we need it now? Well, because you're sick. And they talk really fast, and they yell really loudly and try to convince you, hey, you need this, you need this, you need this, you need this, because you're sick and there's something wrong. You know what you need? If you go back and you actually watch what political people said 3 years ago when the coronavirus hit this time. There's an emergency. There's a big pandemic. We gotta do something because people are sick, and we need people to stay home, and the government will take care of everything. It's the exact same promise that's going on here. Just stay home, keep yourself safe, have a good time. We'll even send out checks. We'll start paying you guys to stay home, and you can use the money for whatever you want to use the money for. No questions asked. And it becomes the exact same picture 83 years ago, or 3 years ago, it became the exact same picture that it was 83 years ago. That's the best way that I can say that. The same offer and the same presentation was happening, and people were empty-headed enough that they just took it and granted the government whatever powers they wanted. And it was a stupid bet, because we're going to turn into the same types of people that Pinocchio and his new friend are going to turn into. So let's get in to the Pleasure Island scene. The conscience is following along a little bit here, but he's lagging behind because he's really bad at his job. And so the stagecoach driver gets Pinocchio, who's right here holding this ace of clubs. I really don't know if there's a perfect interpretation of the ace of clubs. I don't know, but there's a bunch of boys who I think we can assume, like Pinocchio, have not gone to school and filled their heads up with intelligence, because they're just as easily swindled. And there's a good amount of them, and there's this one guy in particular whose name is Lampwick. Now that's an interesting name. What kind of a name is Lampwick?
Like Grant.
Like Grant? Oh, sounds like Grant. Lampwick is the name is a play on the Latin name Lucifer. Lucifer is a Latin translation of the Hebrew out of Isaiah 14. It's not a name for Satan. I'll just tell you that right now. Most people think it is because they're empty-headed puppets and they just believe whatever's been told to them about the Bible. Khalil ben Shahar is the language of Isaiah 14 that in Latin gets translated into a proper name, Lucifer. It's not a proper name, or it's unlikely to be a proper name in Hebrew. But the interpretive process translated into a Latin name, and then when they interpreted it as Satan, it just stuck as a name for Satan. They translated Lucifer because it means light bringer in Latin. Lampwick is the little actual light in the middle of a candle, the wick that gets lit. And so it's a play on the idea that he is going to be this character who brings light and revelation to Pinocchio, but much like Lucifer, or the idea of Lucifer, his ideas are backwards and bad. Okay? So, if you just look at it, compare Lampwick's physical design to everybody else in the story, especially Pinocchio. He's wearing a bow tie like that, he's wearing a hat. He's got much more exaggerated hands, feet, and facial expressions, big ears and stuff. He's a caricature. He's an exaggerated person, like somebody who draws caricatures at the fair, and it's all comedic and stuff. You should be looking at him and realizing this is not somebody whose advice you want to be following. But Pinocchio, being an empty-headed puppet, is going to follow that advice purely. So the conscience, JC, is trailing along behind, and he's sticking in there, but you can see he's as kind of confused and disoriented as anyone, and that's very telling. So here, the coach driver is driving this coach of boys across water. And that's a very interesting idea, because crossing water into new territory is the idea of this shot. And you see how much light is going on over here and how much darkness is over here. And then you see the boat actually going out. You see how dark the boat is? There's light from the heavens, but there's darkness down here. It's a contrast here between heaven and earth, but they're going out to sea, and the sea is chaos, and the sea is death. And so darkness is heading out there into chaotic places and waters here. But notice the doves. They didn't have to draw these. Remember, this is all hand drawings. Why do they draw these? Peace. The idea is that there's still a connection here between the light of heaven above, even in the midst of the dark place. And you kind of see this. Always look for lines in artwork. So you see a line here. The doves follow the light here in the boat. And so it's an idea of saying they're not going to be completely cut off. There is going to be a way out from this darkness. Even when they sail and the light goes away, the angels of heaven that the doves kind of represent, the divine presence of above, are still following along behind, even as the boat sails into darkness. Or is it darkness? Because it looks pretty fun. The kids are actually excited. And look, the stagecoach driver is actually smiling. Hooray, maybe it's all not so bad. In fact, it looks kind of fun. You might be right about that, Casey. They may be stuck here. So it's a giant amusement park. It's called Pleasure Island, and everything looks fun. Look, there's even a big fat police officer, kind of a caricature of a police officer, which is interesting because now we get Lampwick actually kind of expounding his ideas about right and wrong. And what he has to say is not good. Now, look at his pose. He's walking like he knows what he's talking about, but he's a dumb kid. Because all kids are dumb. Sorry. That's the point of the story. You're an empty-headed puppet as much as I was when I was your age. What are you going to do about it? And Lampwick's walking with the stereotypical bravado of a boy who thinks he's a man and knows what he's talking about. And what he's talking about is saying that life is really all about just getting what you want, and going out there and taking what you want. And that's why he's here, and he's going to have what he wants. And he's trying to teach and corrupt Pinocchio to want and do the same thing. And Pinocchio follows right along at his heels. And we come to this shot here. It says model home open for destruction. We get this great telling scene of a home with a lot of stuff going on out here. So the boys are destroying it. It's always boys. Girls never fall into this trap. You're way too smart for this, okay? They say girls develop faster than boys. Well, they're a lot smarter than you are at the same age. I'll tell you that right now, because boys get dragged into this pleasure island thinking that they're going to be happy. And notice the types of things that they're doing. They're kind of cutting up. They're cutting up trees down here, turning over potted plants. So they're destroying nature. They're climbing all over the house. They're destroying this piano and burning it, chopping it up and burning it. So the arts are being destroyed. These are archetypes. These are motifs. These are the same iconic points of storytelling that people have been telling for 10,000 years. It's just a new medium that existed in 1940, animated storytelling. And so we see in the animated story, they're burning the high arts. Look, how much time and effort does it take to learn to play the piano really, really well? A lot. Right. It takes a lot. And so they're burning something that takes a lot of hard work. That's the idea. In fact, it takes a lot of hard work to carve all these statues, to build a house, to build a home. It takes a lot of work. And they're just burning it all down. In fact, that's what it's there for. Hey, why should you actually listen to and obey the teachings of your ancestors that built the piano, that built homes, that learned to conquer fire? Why should you go through all that hard work to learn the wisdom of your ancestors? Just burn it all down. You'll have much more fun that way. That's the idea of Pleasure Island. But let's look at this right here. This is a flower. It's called a mandala. And where's the shot at? Okay, so here's Pinocchio down here with an axe. The only other time I think we've seen an axe in this movie is when Stromboli threw it at the puppet. It's very telling now that Stromboli, who threatened to cut the puppet up, the puppet himself is now chopping up other things. He's going in the opposite direction to become real. And this mandala up here, a mandala is a flower, and the image of the flower is multifaceted, to say the least. But the idea of a flower blooming is to say what's on the inside is coming out and exposing itself to the outer world. It's an image of beauty coming out of difficulty and hard times, blooming, getting through the process and becoming something that Pinocchio is on the journey of doing, but he's really, really bad at it because he doesn't know how to listen to his conscience. And what the boys do is they throw a brick through this and shatter the glass. They destroy the flower because they're destroying the idea that you need to actually do the hard work to come alive and become real. Another way of thinking of it in a lot of imagery is that it's a sunrise. And this will be brought back when Jiminy Cricket finally becomes a good conscience and the Blue Fairy gives him his badge. It looks like the mandala, and it looks like a sun, because the dawning of the sun is the beginning of a new day, or enlightenment, consciousness, waking up to actually become what you're meant to be. And you see this in the Bible. You're supposed to actually grow up and integrate your mind into your faith. You're not supposed to leave your brain at the door when you enter a church. Most people do, because they're not real, whatever that means. They would throw the brick through the mandala window and say, I don't want to go to church and have to learn to think. I don't want to learn to be a real boy. I just want God to give me what I want. I want to use him for my salvation, but I don't want to go through the hard work. Let the home fall. Let it burn. This idea of tearing the home down, man, this is exactly what the Democratic left is selling towards everybody. Hey, come to Pleasure Island. Look, we'll take care of you. We'll do it all and burn down all the hard work of your ancestors and everything that they've done to build a life here that you benefit from. You benefit from somebody building a home. You benefit from the arts. You benefit from people learning to actually conquer fire. You benefit from the enlightenment and learning of other people. Well, hey, why don't you just give in to pleasure and reject it all? Why go to school? Why go through all that hard work? Because it's hard. Why should you have to? Hey, don't worry. We're the government. We'll just take care of you. I mean, that's the promise that they're swindling people with. And because people are rejecting their conscience, rejecting the hard work that goes along with it, instead of just playing stupid games and winning stupid prizes, they get what they get from this stagecoach guy right here. Because while he sees that the boys are off playing, he tells people to close the doors. Now, this is so weird. I mean, we're in this dream state, sure, but there's just these little black creatures. They're like the boat, except they're moving personifications of this thing. Look, the light barely, it doesn't even touch them. The light's shining off here and it doesn't reach these creatures. They close the doors so that the boys can't get out. You know, another form of all of this stuff and in stupid people in the government making these same promises as the stagecoach driver, because what he actually represents is in 1940, when this is being written, he essentially represents communist Russia, just like the red puppets. They're Russians. They're communist, socialist. What's the third one? I've had a brain fart on it. Communist, socialist. I mean, even the democratic socialists are like, hey, let's invite a bunch of people in. Let's give them all the pleasure that they want, and then we'll shut the doors on them. And what happens? Everything burns down. Everything falls apart. And the conscience is showing up a little late here, but he eventually comes to find Lampwick, he comes to find Pinocchio, who's with Lampwick. Lampwick's taught him how to smoke, and it makes him sick. And so the conscience shows up, and he hops on his little soapbox a little bit here, just like he did before, and starts expounding that the boys don't need to be doing this. And Lampwick, of course, he's like, who is this thing? He lifts it up because Lampwick doesn't understand his own conscience as a boy. He's like, what is this? I don't even know what this is, because he doesn't have a conscience. And so he mocks the idea of listening to the conscience at all. Pinocchio, you're so stupid. How could you possibly want to listen to your conscience? The conscience gets upset about this, and so he runs off. And what does he find in the process? He stumbles under a door, and he finds the stagecoach driver with a ship loading up a bunch of donkeys over here. And you see a close-up of him. This one says sold to the circus, sold to the salt mines. This one just said sold. Now, that wouldn't be much of a problem, except that we find out what these donkeys actually are. What are they? Very good, James. They are the boys that not only didn't escape, but they're the boys who were specifically lured there to be turned into animals and sold into slavery. That's the metaphor of what happens when you give too much power to the government. Say, communist Russia of the late 1800s and the early 20th century. Say, communist China. Say, communist dictatorial Germany in World War II. When this movie's coming out, it's all right there. Because the idea is, look, our government will take care of everything. All you have to do is enjoy yourself right up until the moment you've turned into a donkey and you're sold into slavery. Now, why a donkey? What's another kind of phrase that people use for a donkey? A beast of... Never heard this phrase? A beast of burden. Like you're literally good for nothing but doing the hard work of carrying the stuff that we don't want to carry. That's what donkeys were used for around this time and stuff. So the boy donkey says, I don't want to go into slavery. And the stagecoach driver says, get back in there. You're not ready yet because you can still talk. And let's end it here for this evening, and then I'll let you go. Because this is what happens when you give yourself into pure pleasure from a tyrant who's standing over them and has turned all these boys into beasts of burdens, okay? What happens is you become nothing but an animal. You cannot think. You cannot react for yourself. You're good for nothing except being sold into slavery. And that's exactly what the tyrant wants of you. And that's exactly what they're trying to do to you. Keep you from thinking by intoxicating you with everything that you want, giving you everything that you promise. You know how you know God's not a tyrant? Or one of the reasons you know God's not a tyrant? He doesn't give you everything that you want. Because he knows if you did, you would turn into an animal. And God has a higher calling for you as a human than just being an animal. He doesn't want to use you for slave labor. He wants to give you a purpose, a reason for being. He wants you to have a real function and a real purpose that is worth something in this world. But a tyrant just wants to sell you to the circus or to the salt mines. That's exactly what the communists did. Between Russia, Germany, and China in the 20th century, they killed over 100 million people who were non-combatants in the 20th century, thanks to communist, socialist regimes. They took land away from people, and they sold people quite literally to salt mines. So all of this is commentating on this. And if you are not willing to do the hard work of being a good student at school, getting good grades, and going on to gain an education that empowers you to think for yourself, you will turn into an animal who's good for nothing but being sold as a slave. And at your age, it's very important to know this. What do you want to be? A servant to everybody else or a slave to everybody else? Those are your options. Questions? Casey, you had your hand up.
What's the photo where he's standing over the...
Right here or here? Sorry, here.
There. So, right here. Is that not Captain Hook?
Hey, so Peter Pan would come out 14 years after this, but the book, I think, was around at this time. I mean, I don't really remember. I think that's a fair catch. He does look like he's Captain Hook. Captain Hook represents something, and he wears red. I mean, he's just as tyrannical. That's why one of the reasons why Peter Pan doesn't want to grow up. So I don't know if it's necessarily supposed to be, but I think it could be. I think that's a good catch on your part.
It doesn't look like donkey ears. Yeah.
Well, it might be, but then I don't know what his hand would be doing over here because it looks like a fist over here, but that doesn't quite look like a fist over here. So
it looks like it just has a really tiny fist right there.
But I don't know if it's supposed to be, but a sickle. Now you say a sickle because the sickle was part of the Russian communist flag on there. It was the sickle and the hammer, right? So you look it up, and I would say if it's supposed to be, it could be, and that would make a lot of sense because he's the coach driver and the tyrannical father figure that he is a stand-in for communist Russia, and so that would make perfect sense. And I think between you both, you might have gotten onto something there. I don't know that for sure, but I think that's a good catch and idea. Okay.